I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're jumping to the 3DS's top-down Zelda, A Link Between Worlds, as I rank the dungeons from worst to best. While the game treads a lot of the same ground as A Link to the Past, featuring the same overworld and the same progression structure, the dungeons, even when sharing aesthetics with the SNES Classic, manage to feel wholly their own. You could access any dungeon following the Eastern Palace at any time in Hyrule, while in Lorule, all 7 dungeons are accessible from the moment you get there. This does mean that the game has a general non-linear difficulty structure, so depending on the order you take on each dungeon, you might find some of them easier or harder. Let's not waste any time, all 12 dungeons in The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds ranked. Let me know your favourites down below. At number 12, we have Hyrule Castle. After collecting the 3 pendants and unlocking the Master Sword, it's up to Link to traverse Hyrule Castle itself to rescue Impa and Princess Zelda from the clutches of the fabulous Yuga. And like its Link to the Past equivalent, this ends up being a massive enemy gauntlet, designed purely to show off the new power of the Master Sword by allowing you to slaughter all the corrupted knights in your way. We start off with the iconic Ball and Chain Trooper enemy, who is definitely easier in modern handheld Zelda. Being able to move in diagonals really helps with some of the trickier knights. There's ample healing painted along the various walls for you to collect so you won't die. I really like this sequence high up in the tower, where you have to avoid the bombs being thrown by these balcony knights. Since you can't reach them, you have no choice but to find your way through the area. It felt almost like a wipeout course. And those few moments where you step outside and you can see the land of Hyrule below, we get those in a lot of the dungeons in this game, but I just love that trope showcasing those vistas. Ultimately though, this is a dungeon that is over long before it begins, with a decent fight against Yuga to cap it all off. If anything, I just like seeing the canonical office of Princess Zelda herself at the end. It's always nice to see where royalty lounges between official decrees and destroying countries. At number 11, we have the Eastern Palace, the first dungeon of the game. In order to access this dungeon, you have to rent the bow from Ravio's shop, and the bow becomes a focal part of solving the dungeon's puzzles. Now, I've got to admit, I don't really care for the fan service here. The Eastern Palace is so similar to its A Link to the Past counterpart, complete with the same style of entry room with the 3 locked doors, as well as the large central chamber with the cannonball hallway you have to maneuver through. The dungeon is certainly an updated Eastern Palace, but I just prefer originality in my Zelda games, though I do appreciate the various switch puzzles in place that have you use the bow to solve. Opening doors, moving platforms. There's a room on the 2nd floor that has you dodging arrow traps instead, which is rather fitting. We've got rooms filled with cannonball traps you have to navigate, which I did find pretty fun. This room where you have to activate 4 switches while arrows fire at you from the walls, and the boss key is guarded by Stalfos, which is a cute callback, if a bit easy. Something this game does really well though, is the puzzles to reach the boss doors in most of the dungeons. You always have to solve a little something extra to access it, with the Eastern Palace involving some switches that you can't initially hit until you've found the proper solutions. But the Eastern Palace does have one special trick the others don't. This dungeon isn't over when you beat Yuga the boss. Instead, he paints you into the wall, and you gain the ability to merge. This opens up an entire second half of the dungeon that sees you using your new ability to travel across walls so you can escape the complex. Other dungeons include this process before their boss fights, but because the Eastern Palace only introduces this focal mechanic after the battle with Yuga, we get treated to this extended tutorial that feels really satisfying to complete. Using moving walls and shimmying around the palace eventually lands you right at the entrance where the dungeon finally concludes. I'm glad this post-boss sequence exists, because otherwise this would be one of the most forgettable dungeons in the series. But on the other hand, every other dungeon kinda does the merge mechanic better, so... At number 10, we have the House of Gales, a brand new dungeon found in the center of Hyrule's Lake Hylia. To access it, we need to rent Ravio's Tornado Rod, which is one of the more fun items introduced in this game. It allows you to fly upwards into the air while lifting anything around you in the process. It's used in a lot of effective puzzle platforming, as the House of Gales has you needing to climb up each floor by activating the large fans you can find within. Air is a major factor in this dungeon, with smaller fans granting you wind currents that'll blow Link around if he steps in them. Combine with a tighter focus on the merge mechanic we obtained from Yuga, and you have a relatively strong early game dungeon. Any room involving the moving red platforms is a fun time, and we get a nice outdoor balcony where we can activate a few traps and put out a few fires. There's a Helmasaur mini-boss that sets itself alight, and you have to tornado rod nearby to put out its flames. Just some really good level design here, with the third floor being a slight letdown due to the smaller size and super easy to obtain boss key. We even get a fully original boss here with no homage to a previous game. That's rare in top-down Zelda, I'm gonna be honest. My main problem then is that the House of Gales doesn't feel well integrated into the game world. I don't think it's ever explained why there's a giant windmill temple in the middle of the lake, nor does the actual interior of the dungeon feel like it tells a story. It's just a dull sepia aesthetic that I dislike heavily. The palaces around Hyrule made sense. They've always had old ruins in these fantasy worlds. Even the Tower of Hera feels like it has a purpose being on the high peak, but the House of Gales is just so random I can't get over it, and I know that's a really stupid reason to rank it lower, but I like my dungeons to have consistency within its world. It's something I praised about Twilight Princess, and something I will soon praise about Skyward Sword, and I think House of Gales just misses that mark. At number 9, we have the Ice Ruins, found in the northeast portion of Lorule. Now, anybody who watched my Link to the Past ranking knows that the Ice Palace was my favourite dungeon from that game. I think the elevation-based layout was extremely well designed, all of the rooms felt intuitive and fun to explore, and the journey to get the Blue Mail was a genuine navigation challenge. So it breaks my heart that the Link Between Worlds equivalent, the Ice Ruins, just didn't click with me. Despite the fantastic build-up by forcing us through Lionel territory and a climb up through the dark variant of Rosso's Ore Mine, we find a dungeon that feels a little aimless. The main gimmick is that you can use the elevator to access any floor, including the boss key at the very bottom. So you already have the tool needed to face the boss from the very start, and it's all about figuring out the way to get there. And I can totally see why some people would love this variant of non-linearity. I feel like I should enjoy it myself, but something just doesn't add up for me. I really like the use of the fire rod for this dungeon, as there's nothing more satisfying to my little autistic brain than melting every shard of ice I see. Even better when you have the powered up version of the fire rod from Mother Mai Mai that lets you eviscerate everything in sight. When in doubt, the fire rod can light up torches while turning and burning every enemy that stands in your way. We have the return of ice physics, with many of the rooms and later platforming segments containing this slippery trope, and I will admit I got a giddy rush at seeing the green penguins from the SNES game in glorious top-down 3D. I love those little goofs. Basically, whenever the dungeon has us inside the complex, solving various puzzles in the rooms, I'm having a good time. But I get so taken out of the experience anytime I'm forced into the outer part of the ruins, because rather than design a tightly woven dungeon together, we're instead forced into a host of rather bland parkour segments on these unnatural rectangular block platforms. I've never liked the look of these things. The snowflake iconography just feels like far too much, and so much of the latter half of the dungeon devolves into awkward platforming. You can tell that they had the 3D effect of the 3DS in mind here, which is totally fair, but it makes certain sections look very awkward when you don't have that active, as it can sometimes be hard to judge depth perception when figuring out which platforms are on your level versus the level above you. Now, I do love that you can see the lower levels of the outside from above, no loading screens required, something A Link Between Worlds does inherently well with its vertical dungeons. You get to see the hell of the final floor long before you hop down there, but ultimately I find this dungeon extremely unfun to navigate, and I think it's a massive downgrade to what came before it. Again, the little blue block platforms look cheap and uninspired, and we didn't need a snowflake pattern on the regular ice flooring. Fun boss though, but I'll get to that in the next Zelda video. At number 8, we have Skull Woods, found in the northwest portion of Lorule. I think Skullwoods is a massive step up from its SNES counterpart in terms of puzzle design, but has a few shortcomings that keep it from true greatness. I'll get the negatives out of the way first. I think it was a missed opportunity to not make more of the woods themselves be a part of the dungeon. This was a chance to really flesh out the forest. They could have added more enemies in the mix, they could have made some of the passages blocked off and had us searching for a way to open the path to the underground, but they just didn't go for it, which made the gimmick feel less inspired than when they did it on the SNES. This is also the only dungeon in the game to not require a rental item to complete. You use the lantern at various points, but you obtain that item for free near the start of the game, which means none of the puzzles revolve around Link's abilities. What we got instead though was, honestly, a stroke of genius. The Zelda team finally figured out a way to make wall masters interesting. They appear in most rooms, hovering over Link, waiting for the chance to pounce and send him back to the dungeon entrance. But that's not all they do, no. They are used throughout the dungeon to actively solve puzzles. Some switches are placed out of Link's range, only accessible by a rogue hand trying to slam down on us. Some rooms have us hiding under metallic grates as we progress, using timing as an obstacle, as we avoid the wall masters and make progress. And late in the dungeon, we have to collect these eyes from the end of a massive room and make our way back to their pedestals while wall masters try to stop us. These setups were long overdue in this series, and giving the wall masters more of a purpose allows for them to feel fresh and unique. Not to mention, you can also dodge their strikes by merging into nearby walls, which will never not feel satisfying. And with the focus on Wall Masters, they changed the boss of the dungeon from Mothula to Knuckle Master, a massive Wall Master coated in armor who is arguably way fairer and better designed. The dungeon is an overall improvement on the original, which often drove me up the wall with the original Wall Masters, especially in that last stretch before Mothula. I don't have that issue in A Link Between Worlds, though I also admit that the Wall Master puzzles aren't enough to rank it higher than this on the list. At number 7, we have Turtle Rock, found in the southeast portion of Lorule. We've had a couple Turtle Rocks in the series, but I would say A Link Between Worlds variant has the most personality. Here, you need the Ice Rod to complete the various puzzles, but unlike most 2D Zelda dungeons, they really played with the constraints of a turtle-shaped layout. The entire dungeon takes place in a literal turtle-shaped rock, and so it becomes this 2-floor experience where the majority of your time is spent in the main chambers. Floor 1 side rooms have you using warp panels to find secrets, which is not really that entertaining to me, although you can get a piece of heart. Most of the dungeon instead revolves around freezing lava so you can walk across it, with the lower floor focusing on freezing lava columns, allowing you to use your merge transformation on them. It's an extremely tight, yet well-designed dungeon to explore. I like going into 2D so you can shoot these metal bridges off the walls, never gets old. And there are the seesaws which you can freeze in place to reach higher areas, leading to some fun puzzles. Heck, I even like the wizrobes that adorn this dungeon with their presence. More so because killing them actually activates platforms, allowing you to reach specific treasure chests, and the side rooms with the bladers that you have to avoid while using the ice rod to cross the lava streams is pretty ingenious. Honestly, thinking about it, Turtle Rock is basically the blueprint for the divine beasts of Breath of the Wild. It's a dungeon shaped like an animal that actually adheres to the shape of the beast for its official layout. It only has 2 main chambers, with the others being tiny leg offshoots, and a majority of the puzzles are in open view the moment you arrive. But I'll admit, I wish it was a harder experience. Turtle Rock's name has always carried a lot of weight in the series, with it being a difficult dungeon in both A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening. So having it be one of the easiest dungeons in A Link Between Worlds is just something that was not on my bingo card. At number 6, we have Lorule Castle. The final dungeon of the game, Queen Hilda's famous Airbnb of Game Grumps fame, Lorule Castle sees us being tasked with a classic go to the 4 corners of the dungeon and solve the unique puzzles we've set up trope. The main hall is already rather iconic, with the bubbling lava and the purple aesthetic pairing wonderfully with the music. The enemies here are all tough as nails, featuring the hardest soldiers in the game, and the puzzles here take aspects from various low-rule dungeons, elevating them to endgame difficulty. We've got the bomb flower room, where you need to use your bombs to crack open walls and activate switches, all leading to a sequence where you have to carry a bomb flower towards a final obstacle to progress. Between the tricky mini mole dorms that aim to get in your way, plus the surprisingly in-depth red and blue block puzzles, this might be my favourite room of the castle. There's the lava platforming room, where as you walk around, blocks will elevate from the lava, forcing you to use your merge ability to skirt around obstacles. Some of the platforms have spiked balls on top, which you need to remove by leading different spiked balls in their direction. This specific moment on screen was my favourite of these puzzles, really well designed. We have the Dark Room, which takes the mechanics of the Dark Palace and plays with them. The path forwards is only visible when the room is completely darkened, but there are barriers that activate to stop you from progressing. This means you have to memorize the path, then light the lantern and remember the route to progress. Really smart level design, and a great way to expand upon what was already a genius set of mechanics from the Dark Palace. The only room I disliked was the Wallmaster room, if only because needing to ride a platform back across the lava while carrying one of the eyes, while a Wallmaster tries to flatten me, made for a very trying experience. I failed a lot in here. Each tower also ends with a mini-boss encounter, usually against a tough enemy, but in one tower we rematched Argus for some reason. Annoyingly though, you can also find the red mail at the top of the dungeon, which grants the best defense in the game, for the final boss fight, and that's it. I guess there's the enemy gauntlet where the Tower of Hera used to be, but I just dislike when armor power-ups are left until the final dungeon, because they feel so tacked on, like, the game's over, I don't need you, Diva. Lowrul Castle is a solid time all around, great music, great puzzles, fun enemies, and a lovely aesthetic, but it's not in my top 5. At number 5, we have the Tower of Hera, found in the mountain range of North Hyrule. The original version of this dungeon in A Link to the Past is an iconic location of the series. It's where you found the Moon Pearl, allowing you to survive in the Dark World. It was the first dungeon to introduce the red and blue switches that became a staple of top-down Zelda, and it was the introduction of an iconically infamous boss, Moldorm. In A Link Between Worlds, almost all of the same pros apply here as in the SNES. It's a really well-designed vertical dungeon, with a sole focus on ascending the tower and completing each room as you go. Red and blue switches, of course, make their return here, but are now accompanied by mole platforms. Those are the ones with the grinning faces, which you can smack down with your hammer, as when you do, they'll begin to shake before springing back up, launching Link into the air. This is the primary mechanic of this Tower of Hera, as the moles will be your only way to get to the higher floors. The merge mechanic of this game is also crucial to progression, as not only will you explore the tower's interior, but the various floating platforms and walls of the outer exterior as well. It does a similar gimmick to the ice ruins with the outer platforming segments, but I feel with the theming of the tower itself and knowing the dungeon it was based on, it makes a lot more sense to incorporate this here. Tower of Hera is an inherently simple dungeon. Progression truly is just about getting higher and higher. The boss key is found right across from the boss door itself. Everything else is a means to an end. I like that the enemies from the SNES are back, hard hat beetles that can knock you off if you hit them from a bad angle, mini Moldorms hinting at the mother waiting atop the tower, some flying tiles that admittedly could have had a more interesting pattern, but we take what we can get, and a rather copious amount of bladers. I really liked this sequence where we ride a moving platform and have to merge into walls to bypass obstacles before the platform gets away, while handling the crows on the various perches. And there's something very satisfying knowing that the boss fight isn't contained within the tower like the original, but is instead atop the tower in the sky, with you being able to see the rooftop below as you fight. I love those little touches. Tower of Hera just feels really intuitive to explore through, and the use of the hammer may not be too complicated, but by goodness it's a lot of fun, and sometimes that's all I want. At number 4, we have the Thieves' Hideout, found on the western side of Lowrul. This is the equivalent of Thieves' Town from the SNES, and features, you guessed it, a very similar gimmick. You have to infiltrate a den of thieves, posing as a guard and fooling the gatekeeper into letting you in. Once inside, your two main objectives are immediately shown: the location of a young girl that you'll end up rescuing on the lower floor, and the boss door which you'll need to escape through. The first half of the dungeon is all about finding your way down to the girl's cell, avoiding traps like conveyor belts, merging through cell bars to activate switches, and unlocking hidden secrets. You'll see these large shields around the lower floor that look important, but they'll become more interesting later. The real dungeon doesn't start until your prisoner is freed. This young thief wants out, and we have to escort her the long way to escape. If you let her get captured by enemies, she'll be thrown back in her cell and the escape sequence resets, but a lot of the setups are pretty genius to keep you in control. For example, this sequence where you can dunk all the enemies into this giant trapdoor you passed by on the way in. Very satisfying. Or how about this sewer, the lowest floor, where you have to actively create paths for her and use her to activate a series of switches to get further. There's even an incredibly well-hidden chest containing a piece of master ore that you get after unlocking a giant hidden hallway. A memorable moment to be sure. Draining water, activating red and blue switches, killing enemies, it's a true jailbreak. Eventually, you reach the entrance where the door you came from is locked, and with your partner, you can activate a moving shield to reach the boss key, leading to an incredibly well-designed boss fight against Stalblind. What I love is that you're constantly assuming that the girl is the boss, similar to the SNES game, but they subvert this by actually having her tell the truth. The big boss is awaiting your arrival in his room. I also like that the painting you need to collect after beating the dungeon is found in a locked house next door. Nice theming there. My only regret is that they didn't use the large shields often enough in the dungeon. We could have had some fun moving platforming segments, but we only saw them have use for the boss key and the boss fight itself. Could have used an extra conveyor belt or two as well. At number 3, we have the Swamp Palace, found in the southern portion of Lorule. Here you need to rent the hookshot in order to enter, which will allow you to flood the first room and explore the main bulk of the dungeon. Similar to Turtle Rock, the Swamp Palace is a 2-floor dungeon that is effectively mirrored between the upper and lower floors. Every single side room has a staircase leading downwards to the basement floor, alongside a few drop-off points that can be used later in the dungeon to reach certain locked doors. Now, what I really like about the Swamp Palace is that it's an inherently non-linear dungeon, but feels like it has more complexity than a Turtle Rock or an Ice Ruins without feeling overwhelming. Your aim is to raise and lower water levels on each floor to reach different areas, while finding keys needed to progress. Some chests can only be grabbed if the water level is raised, for example, while others can only be obtained when the water level is lowered. We've got the classic Swamp Palace enemy set in place: electrified jellyfish, those insects that skate along the water, aqua orbs that float around the rooms, and some of the puzzle mechanics are really fun, like the rooms that require you to stand on a raft and hookshot through the water. It's like a slide puzzle, but you're the moving block. Or the topmost room at the bottom floor, which has you needing to activate a host of switches to change the direction of flowing water so you can flood all of the bottomless pits, allowing you to swim through them. It's all very intuitive, and so by the halfway mini-boss, you really feel like you understand the dungeon. I love the hookshot targets where you slam into them and merge into the wall at the same time. It looks painful, but is very entertaining to watch. The corner rooms of the upper floor both focus on raising and lowering the water levels to progress, which then has an effect on the rest of the rooms on the floor as well. So suddenly, one change of water level would have you gaining access to a whole host of treasure chests, because getting the big key is your objective, but it's like a few feet away from the boss door. Getting all the optional chests though, that's the real challenge I enjoyed. The boss fight against Argus was ultimately pretty straightforward, but I like that his chamber is smack bang in the center of the temple. It felt placed with purpose. What I like more than any other dungeon in this game though, is that the Swamp Palace is like an escape room or a puzzle box. Its layout is so damn good, and if it wasn't for that hideous background chime in the soundtrack, I might have ranked it number 2. But I genuinely find this music so hard to listen to, which is a big minus for me. Just focus on that background chime. We all Mandela affected ourselves so hard that most of us are convinced it wasn't in the game in the first place, but it was. At number 2, we have the Dark Palace, found in Eastern Lorule. As a clear homage to the Palace of Darkness from A Link to the Past, the Dark Palace had to find a way to really stand out. It wouldn't be enough to just bring back some Helmasaurs, a dark tile set, and call it a day, especially with the hammer no longer being the dungeon item as it was used in the Tower of Hera instead. Here, it's the bombs and your own lantern that take center stage, with you using bombs to break open cracked walls and destroy fragile flooring, while the lantern is used to great effectiveness to keep you from getting lost in the darkness and helping you with later puzzles. Your main aim is to open the path to the boss door, which is blocked by a large mechanism, and the only way to do this is by shining sunlight on the 4 eye switches surrounding the room. But this isn't something immediately communicated to the player, nor are the exact bombable locations obvious. You'll have to explore the dungeon from top to bottom, making sure you haven't missed anything as you progress. Otherwise you'll be like me, making it to the end of the dungeon only to realize you missed a bombable floor in the second room. It's the same mechanic they used briefly in the SNES title in Thieves Town against Blind, and I think it's so smart to bring it back here in somewhere called the Dark Palace. Something I really like is that unlike other dark levels in the series, the Dark Palace actively encourages you to turn off your lantern, as once in the dark, hints about how to progress can appear on the walls. Oftentimes there'll be arrows pointing in a specific way, asking you to merge onto the wall and follow them, but then you have the invisible wall maze on the lower floor, or the exceptionally tricky puzzle needed to access the hidden master ore on the top floor, which I would say was one of the toughest chests in the whole game to obtain. I also have a soft spot for this basement room where you're riding a moving platform and chucking bombs down ramps bowling ball style. We still have remnants of the Eastern Palace, with the dungeon still having the giant boulder hallway, but here I think it makes more sense as a risky obstacle since you can't see the boulders in the darkness. Overall, I really enjoy this rendition of the dungeon. I think it uses darkness and light in a way that no other dungeon in the series has quite managed. The fact this whole mechanic was brought back for a low-rule castle sequence is testament to how well it was designed. Even the boss fight found a way to incorporate the theming of light and darkness. Well done. However, the rest of the dungeons on this list just could not compare to... At number 1, we have the Desert Palace, found in the southwestern corner of Hyrule. And what can I say other than the best glow-up I have ever seen? I considered the Link to the Past Desert Palace to be the worst dungeon in the game. It was unmemorable, aside from the BMO statues, had a boring boss fight, and I didn't like the aesthetics. But the Desert Palace in A Link Between Worlds, they took a lot of ideas from the Sand Palace in Spirit Tracks, and decided to just go nuts. Now, you can only access the Desert Palace after renting the Sand Wand, and let me tell you, this item is used fantastically here, not just in the dungeon itself, but the whole lead up towards it, as you switch between Misery Mire in Lorule and the Desert of Hyrule. Because while the painting you're searching for is in Lorule, it can only be accessed by getting through the Desert Palace in Hyrule and finding a crack in the wall, which is genius, absolutely genius. We start with simple puzzles designed to teach us the Sand Rod's mechanics, using it to create a bridge to spin attack 4 switches, for example, or using it to create a path to pull a statue across which we need to hold down a switch, or creating a path with the blocks that you can merge through to cross gaps. It's all really intuitive. The dungeon item is the Titan's Mitt, which is reminiscent of the Power Glove from the SNES game, and you even leave the dungeon to enter the second half via the same pathway you took in A Link to the Past, which is a really nice touch. Enemy-wise, we've got those sand ants that you have to raise from the ground with the sand wand, Gibdos that continue to be their tanky selves while fitting in with the theming of the temple due to their Egyptian mummy-like appearance, flying tiles upon entering the second half of the dungeon, and of course, BMO statues, who you can now try to block by raising the sand between you and their shots. The puzzles here are just really fun to solve. We've got switch puzzles, statue pushing puzzles, arrow traps trying to snipe you, and my personal favourite, this room on floor 2, where you use the sand wand to actively help move boulders across this room to destroy a series of blocks that will raise the sand level. Then the final floor has a room where you're actively attacking bomb enemies and lifting them up with the sand wand to explode higher up obstacles, and I'm just like, this is so inspired. They played around with a sand wand that could only move in linear directions and managed to milk every drop from this item's potential, and then the dungeon ends with you shifting back to Lorule only to discover that the temple in Lorule is one giant boss arena. Come on! I can't wait to go into that aspect in my boss video ranking. For managing to make a seriously impressive desert temple with a hard focus on genuinely tough puzzles and a sense of forward momentum that keeps the player pressing on at all times, the Desert Palace is my favourite dungeon in A Link Between Worlds, and a contender for the best top-down dungeon in the Legend of Zelda series. And that's my list. Which Link Between Worlds dungeon is your favourite? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future videos. My social medias are on screen. You can follow me on Blue Sky, or you can follow my Twitch channel. I stream 3 times a week. It's a lot of fun. I want to give a shout out to my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month. You guys are amazing. It's $4.99. You get a shout out in the description at the end of videos as well. And every now and then I post special unique Let's Plays just for my members. So be sure to subscribe if you want to support the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Adios.